It was a crisp autumn evening when the postcard arrived, the one that would dismantle everything I thought I knew. We had just finished dinner, the kids were upstairs, and my wife, Jessica, was tidying up the dishes. Our lives were normal, mundane even, but as I thumbed through the mail, I noticed the small card slip between the bills. "Gary, the children aren't yours." 5 words that froze me. My pulse pounded in my ears, and a chill settled in my chest as I read the sentence again. The handwriting anonymous. A joke, I thought, a sick, twisted prank. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The past few months, Jessica had been distant, her warm smiles replaced by fleeting glances and mumbled responses. And the children, they didn't look like me. Sure, everyone joked about recessive genes, but now I wasn't laughing. I pocketed the postcard, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. Jessica entered the room, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment I almost said something, almost demanded an explanation, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I nodded towards her and slipped out to the backyard. The cool air grounded me as I stared at the garden. Our gardener, Brian, trimming hedges with practiced precision. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling. The postcard haunted me, its implications gnawing at my gut. Finally, I ordered a DNA test. Just a precaution, I told myself. But the doubt ate away at me. A week passed before the results arrived. Jessica had gone out with the kids when I opened the envelope. The world spun around me as I read the results. 99.9% chance the children were not mine. I sank to the floor, the weight of betrayal crushing me. My mind raced. Could this be real? Did she cheat on me? My thoughts spiraled, going back over every moment. Every time she came home late. Every unexplained phone call. That night, when Jessica returned, I confronted her. "We need to talk," I said, holding the DNA results in my hand. She paled instantly. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her reaction was all the confirmation I needed. She knew. "Are they mine?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. Jessica broke down in tears, but they didn't move me. "I'm sorry, Gary. I never meant for this to happen. You never meant for what to happen? For me to find out?" I snapped. Rage boiled inside me. "How long have you been lying to me?" Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. The woman I thought I knew had been lying to me for years. "The children," I said, my voice colder than I ever thought possible. "They're not mine." She didn't deny it. I packed her things that night. She tried to beg, tried to explain, but it was too late. The years of trust we'd built shattered with each second she spent pleading. "I don't care about your excuses, Jessica. Take the kids and leave." As she gathered her belongings, tears streaming down her face, I felt nothing but a deep, seething anger. The children, my children, or so I thought, were caught in the middle, unaware of the turmoil crashing through their family. But what could I do? They weren't mine. When the door finally closed behind her, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind numb from everything that had happened. For the first time in years, I was alone in my own house, alone with my thoughts, and the image of that damn postcard burned into my memory. The house was eerily quiet after Jessica and the kids left. For the first time in years, I heard nothing but the low hum of the fridge and the creaking of the floorboards. I should have felt relief. After all, she was gone, but all I felt was emptiness. Everything I had known, everything I had believed in, was a lie. My children, my marriage, all gone in a single moment. Days passed in a fog. I went to work, went through the motions, but nothing made sense anymore. Jessica's silence was the worst part. She didn't call, didn't text. It was like she had vanished from my life, taking the kids with her. Part of me was glad. I didn't want to see her face, didn't want to hear her voice, trying to justify her betrayal. But one night, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, another postcard arrived. I didn't notice it at first, buried beneath a pile of junk mail. But when I finally opened it, I felt my stomach twist in knots. "Ask your gardener about the kids." The words jumped off the card and hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was reading. Brian? My gardener? No, it couldn't be. There was no way. I dismissed it as another sick joke, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Brian had been with us for years, ever since we bought the house. He was quiet, always kept to himself, and did good work. The idea that he could be involved in this was absurd, wasn't it? I replayed every interaction in my head, every moment he'd been around Jessica, around the kids. Had there been signs I missed? Glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking? I couldn't shake it. It gnawed at me, eating away at what little sanity I had left. I started watching Brian more closely when he came to work on the garden. My stomach churned every time I saw him near the house, every time I saw him interacting with the kids in the past, playing with them, teaching them how to plant flowers. It all seemed so innocent then, but now, through the lens of suspicion, it felt wrong. The next morning I decided to confront him. As soon as he arrived, I went straight outside, my fists clenched at my sides. Brian looked up from trimming the hedges, his usual calm demeanor in place. "Gary," he nodded. "Everything okay?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stood there, studying his face, trying to read the man I had trusted for so many years. "How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" I finally blurted out, my voice low and dangerous. Brian froze, his pruning shears halfway to a branch. He blinked, completely caught off guard. "What?" "Don't play dumb," I growled, taking a step closer. "I know what's going on. I know about you and Jessica. His face paled, but he didn't say a word. The silence stretched on, my anger boiling hotter with every second he stayed quiet. You're the father, aren't you? My voice trembled, barely containing the rage surging through me. Are you the father of my kids? Brian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His silence was enough of an answer. I lunged at him, shoving him hard against the hedge. Say it, I yelled. Tell me the truth. He finally spoke, his voice shaking. I don't know, Gary. I don't know. I released him, disgusted by his pathetic display. Get the hell off my property, I snarled. And don't come back. Brian stumbled away, looking terrified, but I didn't care. My mind was racing, a storm of emotions tearing me apart. I went back inside, slamming the door behind me. My hands were trembling as I grabbed the whiskey bottle and poured myself a drink, downing it in one gulp. What was happening? How had my life come to this? First, Jessica's betrayal. And now this? The gardener of all people? The day passed in a blur, and by evening, I found myself staring at the 2 postcards on the kitchen table, my mind running in circles. Who had sent them? How did they know? The thought gnawed at me, kept me awake at night. Someone was watching. Someone knew everything about my life, my family, and they were enjoying the chaos they had created. As I sat there, the thought hit me like a sledgehammer. I had no idea who to trust anymore. Was this even the full truth? Or was there more to this twisted game? The person sending these postcards, they had to be close, didn't they? Someone who knew intimate details of my life, of Jessica's actions. Whoever it was, they weren't done with me yet. I could feel it. The days after my confrontation with Brian were a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was being controlled by some unseen hand, and I was just a pawn in whatever twisted game was being played. Who was behind the postcards? How did they know about Jessica and Brian? I barely left the house, letting work slide as I obsessed over the few clues I had. Every noise outside, every rustle in the bushes, made my skin crawl. Was someone watching me? Spying on me? Another postcard arrived, just as I expected. I found it one morning, lying innocuously in the pile of mail. My hands trembled as I tore it open. There's more to uncover. Keep digging. The message was shorter this time, more cryptic, but it only fueled my suspicion. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone was manipulating me. They wanted me to spiral into madness, to keep questioning everything. And I was falling right into their trap. I needed answers, but there was only one place I could think to start. I hadn't heard from Jessica since the night I kicked her out. She hadn't tried to come back, hadn't contacted me, but I needed to hear her side. I needed to know if she had been with Brian, if he was the father of our children, or if there was something else. So, I called her. It took a few rings before she picked up, her voice tired, distant. Gary, she asked cautiously, as if unsure whether it was really me. Jessica. I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. About everything. There was a long pause. I don't know if that's a good idea right now. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, but I pushed on. I need to know the truth, Jessica. About Brian. About the kids. My voice cracked at the end, the weight of everything I had lost starting to crush me. She exhaled, and I could hear her trying to find the right words. It's complicated, Gary. I don't know where to start. Start with the truth, I said coldly. Was it Brian? Brian? She echoed, confused. What are you talking about? I hesitated, the postcard burning in my mind. Had I gotten it wrong? Someone's been sending me postcards. I explained, my words tumbling out. They said the kids aren't mine. Then they said it was the gardener. Is it true? Was it him? Jessica was silent for so long that I thought she had hung up. But then, finally, she spoke. No, Gary. It wasn't Brian. Then who? I demanded, my patience fraying. Who was the father? There was a long, painful sigh on the other end of the line. I don't know who's been sending you those postcards, but it's not what you think. The kids they are yours, Gary. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? I blinked, my anger flaring. The DNA test said. I know what it said, she interrupted, her voice shaking. But it's not that simple. Gary, there was a mistake, something in the lab. I was going to tell you, but everything spiraled out of control, and I didn't know how to fix it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A mistake? I repeated, incredulous. You expect me to believe that after everything? I don't know what to say, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't cheat on you, Gary. I swear. The kids are yours, and I was going to prove it. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. The Jessica I had known for years wasn't a liar, wasn't someone who would destroy our family on a whim. But the postcards, the DNA test, they painted a different picture. Could the lab have messed up? Could this really have been some terrible mistake? Then who sent the postcards? I asked, my mind racing. Someone knows something. Someone wants me to believe you cheated. I don't know, Gary, she whispered. But please don't shut me out. I'll take another test, whatever you want. Just let's fix this. Her voice was filled with desperation, but I couldn't let go of my anger so easily. I hung up without saying another word. The next few days were agonizing. I didn't know what to believe. Jessica had agreed to take another DNA test, but it would take time to get the results. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a nightmare, my mind twisting with every possible explanation. Was Jessica telling the truth? Had there really been a mistake? Or was she lying to cover her tracks? Then, another postcard arrived. This one was different. No words, just a single photograph. It was of me, sitting in my backyard the day after I kicked Jessica out. The angle suggested it was taken from the bushes, like someone had been spying on me. A cold chill ran down my spine. Whoever was sending these postcards, they were closer than I had imagined. They weren't just tormenting me. They were watching me. I flipped the postcard over, but there was no message. Nothing to guide me, just a picture. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Someone had been there just outside watching every move I made. And now, they let me know. As I lay awake, my thoughts spiraled further into paranoia. This person, they were playing a long game. But why? What did they want from me? I had no answers, but one thing was clear. Whoever was behind this wanted me broken. They wanted me to unravel until there was nothing left. But I wasn't going to let that happen. The photograph haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Me, sitting alone, the weight of the world crushing down on me, while someone watched from the shadows. It was a sick game, and I was the main attraction. Days passed without any sign of Jessica or the kids. I'd asked her to stay away until the new DNA results came back, needing space to process everything. But in her absence, the silence of the house was deafening. The walls seemed to close in on me, the weight of every unsaid word, every unresolved issue pressing down harder. I needed answers. Whoever was behind this was enjoying watching me fall apart. And now that I knew they were closer than I could have imagined, I had to fight back. The next morning I made a decision. If they were watching me, it was time for me to start watching them. I ordered security cameras, installing them around the perimeter of the house, hiding them in places where no one would suspect. If someone was lurking in the shadows, I would catch them. As I worked, a small part of me felt paranoid. Was I really going to turn my house into a fortress? But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever this was, they were getting bolder. The postcards had started with words, then suspicions, and now pictures. It was escalating. That evening, I sat in the dim glow of the living room, watching the video feed from the cameras. Hours passed with nothing out of the ordinary. No movement, no suspicious activity. But I wasn't discouraged. I was prepared to wait as long as it took. At 2 a.m., movement caught my eye on the monitor. Someone, dressed in dark clothes, face obscured, crept toward my front gate. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, frozen. They moved with purpose, stopping briefly to glance around before slipping something into the mailbox. I jumped from my seat, adrenaline surging through me as I rushed to the door. By the time I flung it open, the figure had vanished into the night. I scanned the street, but it was empty. Whoever it was, they were gone. I hesitated before opening the mailbox, my hands shaking. Inside was another postcard. My blood ran cold as I read it. You're getting close. But are you ready for the truth? I dropped the card onto the floor, my mind racing. The truth? What truth? Everything was falling apart, and now I was on the verge of discovering something bigger, something that had been hidden from me all along. But what? I couldn't sleep after that. My mind refused to let go of the image of that person outside my house, taunting me, leaving clues for me to find. They were pushing me, drawing me deeper into this nightmare. The next morning, I called Jessica. I needed to hear her voice, to ask her again, hoping that somehow, this time, she'd reveal something she hadn't before. Gary, she sounded hesitant, unsure of why I was calling after our last tense conversation. I got another postcard. I said bluntly. This one said I'm close to the truth. There was a long pause on her end. What does that mean? She asked, her voice small. I don't know, but I think someone is watching me. Someone who knows everything that's happening between us. I paused, running a hand through my hair in frustration. Jessica, do you know anything about this? Anything at all? Could it be someone from your past? Someone trying to hurt me through you? She was silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, thinking. I don't know, she finally said, but there was a hint of doubt in her voice. There's no one I can think of but Gary. This whole thing, it's not just about us. Someone's playing with both of us. Her words settled into my mind like a stone dropped in deep water. Both of us, I echoed. Then who? Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I've got to go, I said quickly, hanging up before she could respond. I approached the door cautiously, every instinct screaming at me that this could be another part of the game. When I opened it, I found nothing but a small envelope on the ground, no sign of who had delivered it. I bent down, picked it up, and went back inside before tearing it open. Inside was a key. No note, no explanation. Just a key. I stared at it, turning it over in my hand. What was this for? What door would it open? And why was it being given to me now? The puzzle pieces were all there, but none of them fit together. The postcards, the surveillance, the key, it was all leading somewhere, but I had no idea where. And whoever was behind this was loving every second of my confusion. I sat down at the kitchen table, the key resting on the wood in front of me like a challenge. Whoever had sent it wanted me to figure out its purpose, but I was done being led around. I wasn't going to follow their breadcrumbs anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't thought I'd ever call. Brian, I said when he answered. We need to talk. There was a long silence on the other end before he responded. Gary, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't care. I cut him off. I'm tired of the lies, tired of the games. Meet me at the park near the house in an hour. I want answers. Before he could argue, I hung up. An hour later, I was sitting on a bench in the park waiting. The cool breeze did little to calm the storm raging inside me. Brian arrived a few minutes later, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, looking as guilty as a man could be. "Gary, I don't know what you think." "Stop," I snapped, standing up and facing him. "I don't care about what happened before. I don't care if it was you or someone else. I just want to know what the hell is going on." Brian shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the empty park. "I told you, I don't know anything." I reached into my pocket, pulling out the postcards I had been sent and thrusting them at him. "Look at these, Brian. Someone's been sending me these, and they know everything. They know about Jessica, about the kids, about you." Brian's eyes widened as he stared at the cards. I swear, I didn't send these." I studied his reaction, looking for any sign of deceit. But he seemed genuinely shocked. "So who did?" I pressed. "Who knows everything?" He looked at me, fear creeping into his expression. "Gary, I don't know who it is, but whoever's doing this, they're dangerous. I think you're in over your head." Brian's warning stuck with me, unsettling in its simplicity. "You're in over your head." I wanted to brush it off as more paranoia, but the look in his eyes told me he believed it. He was scared, and if there was one thing I knew about Brian, it was that he wasn't the type to rattle easily. After our tense meeting at the park, he practically bolted, muttering something about needing to stay away from this mess. I watched him leave, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Every path I took led me back to the same question. Who was pulling the strings? Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the key. I had no idea what it was for, but I was sure it was important. The person behind this had led me here, deliberately. They had all the control. And now, they were handing me a key, literally and figuratively. But to what? That night, I barely slept. I kept going over the clues, the cryptic postcards, Brian's shaken demeanor, Jessica's tearful pleas for me to believe her. It was all connected. But how? And then there was the key. I picked it up, the metal cool in my palm, its weight heavier than it should have been. I needed to know what it unlocked. Morning came, and I decided it was time to move. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for another postcard to land in my mailbox. If someone was watching me, I'd watch back. I grabbed the key, my phone, and headed to the local locksmith. The shop was small and cluttered with tools and boxes of locks, the air thick with the smell of metal and grease. A grizzled man behind the counter looked up as I approached. "What can I do for you?" he asked. I placed the key on the counter. "I need to know what kind of lock this opens." He picked it up, squinting at it through his glasses. He turned it over in his hands, frowning slightly. "It's not your standard house key. Looks like it's for a storage unit or a lockbox, maybe even a garage." My heart pounded. A storage unit. Something clicked into place. I knew exactly where to go next. There was only one storage facility in town, the kind of place people used to store their excess junk or hide things they didn't want anyone else to see. I drove there immediately, my mind racing. Was this the final piece of the puzzle? The facility was quiet when I pulled in, rows of identical metal doors stretching out in front of me. I approached the office, trying to play it cool as I asked the attendant if there was a unit under my name or one matching the key. She typed into her computer, frowning at the screen. "There's no unit under your name, but I can match the key to the lock system." "Hold on." A few tense minutes passed before she nodded. "Unit 17B. Looks like it's registered to someone named Caroline Easton." My breath caught in my throat. Caroline Easton. That was a name I hadn't heard in years, a neighbor from our old neighborhood, long before Jessica and I moved to this house. She'd lived 2 doors down, a friendly face, always stopping by to say hello. She had been a fixture in our early years of marriage, but then she moved away suddenly. I hadn't thought about her since. Why the hell would she have a storage unit linked to me? The attendant handed me the key back with a nervous smile. "You can go check it out. Just let me know if you need anything." I barely heard her as I made my way to Unit 17B. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and with a click, the door rolled up, revealing the contents inside. At first glance, it was an unremarkable storage unit. Boxes stacked neatly against the walls, a few pieces of old furniture, nothing that screamed revelation. But as I stepped inside, my eye caught something on top of a box in the back corner. A stack of photographs. I picked them up, flipping through them with trembling hands. They were all of me, Jessica, the kids, years of our life captured through someone else's lens. Photos of us at the grocery store, walking through the park, even in our own backyard. Some of the photos were from months ago, but others were recent, too recent. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. Someone had been watching us for years, and they had been watching me specifically for a long, long time. There was a final photo at the bottom of the stack that made my blood run cold. It was of me and Jessica on our wedding day, standing outside the church, beaming at each other, full of hope and love. But in the background, standing far off to the side, almost out of frame, was Caroline Easton, watching us with an intensity one had never noticed before. I stumbled back, dropping the photos onto the floor. Caroline. It had to be her. She had been there the whole time, lurking in the shadows, waiting. But for what? Suddenly, everything started to make sense. The postcards, the DNA test, the surveillance. Caroline had been orchestrating all of it, twisting the knife just enough to make me question everything. But why? As I stood there trying to process it all, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hand still shaking. A text from an unknown number. "Now you know the truth. I was always watching. Meet me at our old neighborhood tonight. You'll understand everything. I stared at the message, the words blurring as my mind raced. It was her. It had to be. Caroline. Without thinking, I rushed out of the storage unit, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. The drive to our old neighborhood was a blur. The streets were familiar, but it felt like I was venturing into the unknown. My mind raced with every possible scenario. Caroline's face, the years she spent lurking behind the scenes, orchestrating this nightmare. But why? Why me? Why Jessica? Why now? I pulled up to the old house where Caroline used to live. It was abandoned now, the once well-kept lawn overgrown with weeds, the windows boarded up. The memories of this street, the early years of my marriage, the hopes and dreams Jessica and I had, came flooding back, tainted by the realization that the woman living 2 doors down had been watching us all along. I stepped out of the car, the evening air cool against my skin. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the house. The front door was slightly ajar, a faint creak echoing as I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, the house dark except for a single dim light coming from the living room. I walked cautiously through the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. And there, sitting on an old, dust-covered couch, was Caroline. She looked almost exactly as I remembered her, slim, with long dark hair, her eyes sharp and watchful. But there was something else now, something darker. Her lips curled into a small smile as she saw me, her hands resting calmly on her lap. "You made it," she said softly, her voice calm, as though we were old friends meeting for coffee. I stood frozen in the doorway, anger and confusion battling inside me. "What is this, Caroline?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. "What the hell is going on? Why have you been doing this to me?" She didn't flinch at my tone. In fact, her smile widened, like she had expected this reaction. "Sit down, Gary," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "We got a lot to talk about." "I'm not here to talk," I shot back. "I want answers. Now." She sighed, standing up slowly. "You always were impatient." "Fine. Answers, then." She walked over to an old cabinet in the corner, pulling out a small, worn box. As she opened it, I saw more photos, more of me, Jessica, the kids. She held one up, a photo of Jessica and me on our wedding day, just like the one I had found in the storage unit. "You were so happy back then, weren't you?" she said softly, her eyes distant as she stared at the photo. "So full of life, so naive." I clenched my fist, trying to keep my temper in check. "Caroline, I'm warning you." "Warning me?" She laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the empty house. "Gary, you don't even know what you're warning me about." I stepped forward, my patience wearing thin. "Then explain it to me. Why the postcards? Why the lies? What do you want from me?" Caroline's smile faded, and she set the photo down, turning to face me. "What do I want?" she repeated, her voice low. "I want you to understand. I want you to see what you took from me." I frowned, confused. "Took from you? What the hell are you talking about?" She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time, I saw the pain behind her gaze. "Jessica," she whispered, "she took you from me." The room seemed to tilt, and I felt like I had missed a step on a staircase. "What?" I breathed, trying to make sense of her words. Caroline crossed the room slowly, her footsteps deliberate, as if she were pacing out her own confession. "Before you and Jessica were together, it was me," she said softly. "We were close, Gary. Don't you remember?" I shook my head, my heart pounding harder. "We were neighbors, Caroline. That's all." She smiled sadly. "Neighbors, is that what you think? Is that how you saw it? God, I was right there. I was always right there, waiting for you to see me." But then she came along. Caroline's eyes darkened as she said Jessica's name. "She took you, and you never even looked back." I was speechless. I couldn't even begin to understand what she was saying. "Caroline, that was years ago. I barely knew you back then." "But I knew you," she said, her voice tightening. "I knew everything about you, Gary. And I've watched you, all these years, living the life that should have been mine." I felt my stomach twist. "That's insane," I muttered, taking a step back. "You're saying this is all because you had some crush on me? You destroyed my life because of that." Caroline's face hardened. "It wasn't just a crush, Gary. It was love, and you never gave me a chance." She gestured around the room, her voice rising. "You went off with Jessica, built a life, had kids, and left me behind. You don't get it, do you? You don't get what it's like to be invisible, to be forgotten." The weight of her words hit me, but all I felt was a growing anger. "So what? You sent me those postcards to ruin my marriage? To make me doubt everything? Why?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fury. "What did you hope to accomplish?" She looked at me, her expression softening. "I wanted you to see me. I wanted you to come to me broken, just like I was. And now here you are." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're insane," I whispered. Caroline stepped closer, her gaze intense. "No, Gary, I'm not insane. I'm just tired. Tired of waiting for you to realize what you should have known all along." I backed away, my mind spinning. This whole time, she had been watching, waiting, pulling the strings of my life. All because of some twisted idea of love. "You've destroyed everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica, the kids, everything." Caroline's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or satisfaction. "Jessica never deserved you. You deserve someone who really understands you. Someone who's been there all along. I shook my head, unable to comprehend the depth of her delusion. I'll never be with you, I said, my voice firm. I want nothing to do with you. For the first time, Caroline's smile faltered. She blinked, as if the reality of my words was finally sinking in. But, you're here now, she said, her voice wavering. You came. You know the truth. We can start over, Gary. We can have the life we were supposed to have. No, I said firmly, stepping back toward the door. I'm done with this. With you. Her eyes filled with desperation, and she lunged toward me, grabbing my arm. Gary, please, she cried. Don't leave me again. I did this for you. I shook her off, my heart racing. Stay away from me, Caroline. Stay away from my family. Her face twisted with pain, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, her expression hardened. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice venomous. You'll regret walking away from me. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I got into my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As I drove away from that house, from Caroline and her madness, I felt a sickening mix of relief and dread. This was far from over. The drive home was silent, but inside my mind, there was nothing but noise, an overwhelming storm of thoughts I couldn't escape. Caroline had been behind everything, all these years, watching, waiting, weaving her way into my life like some invisible ghost. I had no idea how deep her obsession ran, or how far she was willing to go. I reached home just as the sun was setting, the house bathed in a soft orange glow. But it didn't feel like home anymore. Not after everything I'd learned, everything that had unraveled in the past few days. My life was a mess, torn apart by a woman I barely remembered from my past. I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. The weight of what Caroline had done was only beginning to settle in. She had orchestrated everything, the postcards, the lies, the doubt. She had turned my marriage into a battleground, making me question everything I thought I knew about Jessica, about my children. And for what? Some twisted fantasy that I would come crawling back to her? I grabbed my phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing Jessica's number. She needed to know what had happened, the truth behind everything. It rang twice before she picked up. Gary. Her voice was cautious, guarded. I hadn't spoken to her since our last call, and I could tell she wasn't sure what to expect. It's not what we thought, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. What do you mean? She asked, the tension clear in her voice. I hesitated, unsure how to begin. How could I explain that everything we'd been through had been orchestrated by someone from our past? Someone we hadn't even thought about in years. It's Caroline, our old neighbor. She's the one who's been sending the postcards. She's been watching us for years. Caroline? Jessica's voice was incredulous. Are you serious? I could understand her disbelief. It was insane. Yeah, I want to see her. She's been following us, taking pictures, feeding me lies. She wanted me to think you were cheating on me. She wanted me to fall apart, so I'd go to her. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Jessica processing the weight of what I was saying. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. That's insane. I know, I said, rubbing my eyes, trying to fight off the exhaustion. But it's the truth. I confronted her. She admitted everything. Jessica let out a shaky breath. So, the kids? The test? I think she tampered with the results, I said. I don't know how, but it doesn't make sense any other way. She was messing with everything. We'll get another test done, but I believe you. I'm sorry for all of it. Jessica was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, filled with a mix of relief and sadness. Gary, I didn't know what to do. You wouldn't listen, and everything was falling apart. I was scared. I know. I replied, guilt gnawing at me. I should have trusted you. Should have seen through it. Another pause. What happens now? With her? I don't know, I admitted, but I'm not letting her get away with this. Jessica sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice too. Okay, just let me know when you want to meet to talk. We hung up, and for a moment, I felt a small sliver of peace, knowing that Jessica and I were at least on the same page. But that peace was short-lived. I couldn't just let this end here. Caroline had destroyed my life piece by piece, and she couldn't simply walk away. I needed to know how far she had gone. If she could manipulate a DNA test, what else had she done? The next morning, I made a call to the police, explaining everything. Caroline stalking, the postcards, her invasion of my privacy. I didn't know if there was enough for a legal case, but I had to try. The officer on the other end listened patiently, but I could tell he thought this was some kind of personal drama blown out of proportion. We'll look into it, sir, he said in a tone that was more dismissive than reassuring. I wasn't satisfied. I needed more. I decided to pay a visit to the private investigator I'd hired to help with the DNA test, the one who had been looking into Jessica's potential affair. Maybe he had missed something. His office was a small, unassuming place in the heart of the city. When I walked in, he was sitting at his desk, flipping through some paperwork. Gary, didn't expect to see you back so soon, he said, raising an eyebrow as I sat down across from him. I need you to look into someone else, I said, cutting straight to the point. Caroline Easton. She's the one behind everything. He nodded, his expression serious. I'll see what I can dig up. What exactly do you want me to focus on? Anything. Everything. I need to know how deep this goes. She's been stalking me and my family for years. I need something solid to take to the police." He scribbled down some notes and leaned back in his chair. "I'll start digging. Give me a couple of days." I left his office feeling slightly better, knowing that someone was finally taking this seriously. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Caroline wasn't done. She had come this far, and something told me she wasn't going to give up so easily. That night, as I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the blank TV screen, a familiar sound echoed through the house. The faint rustle of paper sliding through the mail slot. My blood ran cold. Another postcard. I jumped up, rushing to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed the postcard off the floor, my hands trembling as I turned it over. It was blank. No words, no pictures. Just the empty white space. I flipped it over again, searching for anything that could explain what this meant. But there was nothing. And that's when it hit me. The silence was the message. She wasn't done with me. Not yet. The blank postcard sat in my hands like a ticking time bomb. The silence it represented was louder than any of Caroline's previous messages. She wasn't backing down, and this was her way of telling me that she had the final move. My heart raced as I sat there, trying to figure out what she had planned next. Days passed, and I didn't hear from Caroline. The police, unsurprisingly, didn't follow up with any urgency. The private investigator was still looking into her, but the longer it took, the more I felt like I was running out of time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Then one evening I got the call. It was the investigator. "I found something," he said, his voice tense. "It's bigger than we thought." "What is it?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "You're not the first person she's done this to." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" "She's done this before. A few years ago, to another man, same pattern. She fixated on him, manipulated him, and nearly destroyed his life. The guy left town, changed his name, disappeared completely. I found some old reports that match her MO. This isn't just about you, Gary. Caroline has a history." I felt sick. Caroline's obsession wasn't just a one-off thing. She was a predator, and I had been her latest target. "Did anyone stop her?" "No," the investigator replied. "There were no formal charges. She's slippery, knows how to stay just below the radar." I swallowed hard, fear creeping into my bones. "So, what do I do now?" "She's dangerous," he warned. "If she feels like she's losing control, she could escalate." I hung up, my mind spinning. Caroline had done this before, and she had gotten away with it. I was just the latest in a line of men she had destroyed. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I decided to take matters into my own hands. That night, I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and drove back to the storage unit. I needed to find more proof, something solid that would force the police to take action. I had missed something the first time. I was sure of it. When I arrived, the facility was deserted. I parked outside Unit 17B and unlocked the door. The familiar smell of dust and stale air greeted me as I stepped inside. The boxes were still there, untouched since my last visit. I moved quickly, digging through the stacks of photographs and documents, searching for anything that could give me leverage. And then I found it. At the bottom of one of the boxes, buried under years of old papers, was a small black notebook. The pages were filled with Caroline's handwriting, meticulous, neat, and obsessive. Every detail of my life, Jessica's life, even my kids, was written down in that book. It wasn't just random notes. It was a timeline. She had been planning this for years. I flipped through the pages, horrified at what I saw. Caroline had documented everything. Every time Jessica and I fought, every time we made up, every moment of doubt or weakness. She had been manipulating me from the start, planting seeds of mistrust, slowly driving a wedge between us. And worse, she had been watching the kids too. As I neared the end of the notebook, my breath caught in my throat. There, written in her tidy script, was a chilling sentence. "Once he's broken, he'll come to me." I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just about some twisted revenge fantasy. Caroline had wanted to break me, to isolate me from my family until I had no one left but her. She wanted to destroy my life, so she could rebuild it with her at the center. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a faint creak like the sound of a door being pushed open. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned around. Caroline stood in the doorway of the storage unit, her face partially hidden in the shadows. Her eyes gleamed with a cold intensity, and her lips curled into a smile. "You shouldn't have come here, Gary," she said, her voice soft but menacing. I backed up instinctively, my hand tightening around the notebook. "It's over, Caroline. I know everything. I'm taking this to the police." She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Do you really think they'll believe you?" "I've been careful. There's no evidence tying me to any of this." I held up the notebook. "This is all the evidence I need." Caroline's smile didn't falter. "That's just a diary, Gary. My personal thoughts. It doesn't prove anything. Besides, by the time the police get involved, you'll be too far gone to care." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my stomach tightening. She took another step forward, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You've already started to unravel. Everyone can see it. The stress, the paranoia, it's eating you alive. It's only a matter of time before you snap." I clenched my fists, rage boiling up inside me. "I'm not the one who's crazy, Caroline. You are." She let out a soft laugh, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Maybe, but in the end, it doesn't matter. You've already lost everything. Your marriage, your kids, your peace of mind. And the best part? You did it to yourself. Her words stung, but I knew the truth now. You'll never have me, Caroline. This ends tonight. Her expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw the real Caroline, the cold, manipulative monster behind the friendly neighbor I had once known. No, Gary, she said softly, almost pityingly. You've already lost. And then she lunged at me. I reacted instinctively, shoving her back with all my strength. She stumbled, crashing into a stack of boxes, the contents spilling across the floor. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I bolted out of the storage unit, sprinting to my car. My heart pounded in my chest as I threw the car into gear and sped out of the facility. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town. Only then did I pull over, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The notebook sat on the passenger seat, its pages fluttering in the wind from the open window. It was over. I had the proof I needed. Caroline couldn't hide anymore. The police took the notebook and launched a full investigation. It didn't take long for them to uncover more about Caroline's past. The other men, the manipulation, the stalking. This time, she wasn't going to slip through the cracks. She was arrested, and as the legal process unfolded, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Jessica and I met soon after, and we talked, really talked for the first time in months. The damage had been done, but there was a sense of closure now. We were taking things slow, trying to figure out what our future looked like, but at least we were doing it together. As for Caroline, I never saw her again. Her obsession had driven her to madness, and now she was facing the consequences. In the end, she didn't get what she wanted. She didn't win, but the scars she left behind would take time to heal.